Hello and welcome to today's live stream on fish passage design, an up and downstream journey. My name is Amanda Major, and I'm the Outreach and Events Coordinator at the Connecticut River Conservancy. Today, we are on a journey that is framed by resilience and persistence. We're diving in to learn about fish passage on the Connecticut River. It's a critical component of our river's health. Today, our speakers will explain the importance of fish passage in fisheries management, the intricacies of proper design, and what goes into getting it right. We'll tie it all together by looking at design examples on the Connecticut River, and we'll hear more information about CRC's migratory fish program work and how you can get involved. I'm really looking forward to getting curious with all of you as we journey below our river surface to take a deeper look at the actions behind restoring migratory pathways. I want to share a few reminders before we get started. Please keep your mic on mute during the presentation so our speakers can be heard without distractions. We love and encourage your questions. Please type them into the chat in the lower portion of the screen. We'll save time at the end to answer as many as possible. As always, feel free to depart whenever it's best for you. We're recording this episode and we'll post it to our YouTube channel, where you can also view recordings of past live streams. And finally, I'll be sending out an email later today with a link to the recording, some follow-up resources, and other ways you can stay connected to CRC's current work. Now, let's welcome our speakers. Our first speaker is Ken Sprankle. Ken has been the project leader for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Fisheries Programs Connecticut River Office since 2009. Ken graduated from UMass Amherst with a Master of Science in Fisheries Science in 1994 and worked as a New Hampshire fish biologist from 94 to 2000. Since 2000, he has worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife in a variety of roles and offices, with his one constant being involved with migratory fish restoration over the past 39 years. His work with migratory fish restoration began with a seasonal fisheries job working with CRC board member Steve Gephardt at Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection's Fisheries Division. Our second speaker is Jesus Morales. Since 2011, Jesus has served as a fish passage engineer for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, restoring aquatic connectivity across the Northeast region and beyond through technical design and hydropower regulatory work. A graduate of the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez and UMass Amherst, he specializes in developing fish passage design guidelines and advancing stream simulation and fishway techniques for aquatic organism passage. And our final speaker is Dr. Kate Buckman. Kate became the Connecticut River Conservancy's aquatic ecologist in 2025 after serving as the river steward for New Hampshire, beginning in 2022. She's studied fish in environments ranging from coral reefs to hydrothermal vents to estuaries and large rivers. She has a passion for community science and for getting people excited about our underwater neighbors and the connections between us. We are so thrilled about this wonderful speaker lineup today. Now let's get into our fishy adventure. Take it away, Ken.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you all for joining us today. Very grateful for CRC for setting these up. And as I'll talk about, I work quite closely with CRC in a number of different ways. So let me open up my presentation. Bear with me a second. Okay. Share. I'm going to go to presenter mode and let's see if that's going to. Are you seeing the presenter mode? Okay, great. Yep, seeing that. So again, I want to thank CRC. You heard the introduction. So again, I work for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the fisheries program. And I've been in this particular position since 2009 as a project leader. And my office is very focused on migratory fish restoration. And we're going to talk about those species and some of the unique features given their life history and management challenges. Okay, the Connecticut River Basin, largest river basin in New England. I think many folks on this call know a lot about the Connecticut River Basin. This image right here shows, from the mouth up to the Canadian borderline where it runs through. It's showing the major tributary systems and some of the barriers, not all of them. So this just gives kind of a little snapshot. And I think that the thing that makes it complex and interesting is we go through 4 different states. And so that presents challenges and opportunities in the management and restoration activities that we're involved with. So migratory fish species, you'll see that the heading there, diadromous fish. It's a technical term. It means that fish that use both freshwater and marine environments to complete their life history. That's comprised of 2 groups, the anadromous fish, which is all of the fish with the exception of American eel. And I'm going to focus more on American shad and blueback herring. Those are 2 species. We're trying to restore all of these species. Before I move off to get into the shad, the endangered species, fish species that we have in the river include short-nosed sturgeon, where the population has actually been improving. We've got a lot of different research activities going on, including CRC is going to be involved in some work. And we also have Atlantic sturgeon that historically we had a population in the Connecticut River. It was overfished and lost in the 1800s, but we've actually documented spawning activity, which is quite exciting down in Connecticut with the state of Connecticut doing research there. So American shad, let's talk a little bit about them. American shad, blueback herring, alewife, these are species that are coming to fresh water to spawn after spending 90% of their lives out in the marine environment. They come back to spawn in the months of early April through June to complete their life cycle. And they spawn multiple times. So the eggs will develop and they do batch spawning. And these fish, unlike salmon, are not going back to a specific area. They're just going back to the river system. We have high fidelity along the Atlantic coast in terms of these populations and these fish returning to their home waters. Another species that I think is of interest to a lot of folks are the sea lamprey. We have management plans for many of these species. I'm going to talk a little more about that, but sea lamprey are a really cool species. It is a parasite, but in freshwater, when they return to spawn, and they will die, they are single spawning fish. They contribute important contributions to the ecosystem, and so we want to restore them to their range in numbers as well throughout the Connecticut River Basin. The American eel is the unique species. So that's the species that's doing the opposite in terms of a life history. They're going to the ocean to spawn, and they spawn in the Sargasso Sea. It's south of Bermuda, a large area. Sargasso algae is in the news now. So they migrate along the coast as very small life stages, glass eels, and they enter the rivers in March and April at the mouth and migrate up the river to grow and mature. So move on now. I work as the restoration coordinator for the Connecticut River Migratory Fish Restoration Cooperative. So again, we've got multiple states, 4 different states. So we've got different agencies. It's a fishery program driven cooperative. This program on different forms and names has occurred continuously since 1967, which is really unique along the Atlantic coast, that the agencies agreed, hey, let's work together to restore migratory fish, with the focus primarily being Atlantic salmon early on, which we no longer work to restore. There's climate change issues with that. But these other species are all in states of much lower abundance than what we want from a management standpoint. So you can see the different groups there. And I work with many folks on different committees and teams within this group. So another very important management organization is the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. So the Connecticut River is a river basin group. You have the state jurisdictions. This is the entire Atlantic coast. And I represent the Fish and Wildlife Service on the Shad and River Herring Technical Committee. There are other technical committees for things like lobsters and bluefish and American eel. So many different groups. And we do stock assessments. Any regulatory change has to be approved by the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission for the species they're responsible for, which include shad, blueback herring, alewife, short-nosed sturgeon, eel. So many of the species we're talking about. So how do the state and federal agencies manage and restore fish populations? First, coordination is really critical, right? Being migratory fish, they're crossing multiple jurisdictions. They're out in the ocean. They're going through different state waters. So we have the state roles, the state organizations. As I mentioned, we have our river basin group, and there are other examples of those along the coast, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. And we also work in partnership with many different entities, including private and river users like the hydroelectric, and NGOs, non-governments like Connecticut River Conservancy. We also use the best science available, right? What are the status and trends of these populations? What factors are influencing the dynamics of those populations? We need to develop plans. We work on developing goals, objectives. Goals would be to restore a fishery for recreational and commercial uses, and also to restore the ecological integrity and value of those species. We have objectives, strategies. The strategies include things like fish passage. We need to evaluate these plans. So that's some monitoring and assessment work. I do a lot of that with electrofishing boats, different equipment with other people to determine status and trends, if there's responses for the work that we're doing to try and restore the populations. We have research questions that come up as we're doing monitoring and assessment. And things like that may be, for the fish that enter the river, how long does it take them to get to different habitats? And that's where we'll do tagging studies with radio telemetry gear or other acoustic gear. And we also have regulatory roles. So that's something with the FERC relicensing. So the federal government licenses hydroelectric projects. So also regulations regarding harvest and bycatch. That's the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission in the state. So those are some examples of that. The Connecticut River Cooperative, we've been working to develop plans with goals, objectives, strategies, where do we want to go with these things. So a recent plan that we just completed is specific to anadromous fish. So it's not eel. We're working on a separate eel plan. But you can see we've developed out of my office, I've got a biologist that's very good on technical things, and he's developed this geographic information system. We've got all the barriers, the range of the fish, where the barriers are located. And it allowed us to kind of prioritize and identify areas where we want to provide focus. So you can see on this figure right here, this northernmost dot up here is Bellows Falls in Vermont. That's where American shad historically went to, blueback herring went to. So when we talk about anadromous fish, we're generally speaking habitats downstream of Bellows Falls, with the exception of sea lamprey, which extend well beyond that historically. Okay, another really big plan that we developed a while back is the American Shad Management Plan. That was when we were known as the Connecticut River Salmon Commission. Same group of people. I was in the same role. A number of goals, objectives, strategies. Most importantly, this plan developed and defined fish passage metrics, because for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, it's supposed to be safe, timely, and effective. Well, that leaves things kind of wide open in terms of what the survival and passage rates may be. And in the field, we knew that we can do better than that with the science that we had at the time. And so we developed fish passage performance criteria, which other people are now utilizing. And so I don't expect people to read the fine detail there, but I'm just going to give you some of the summaries. That for an American shad that reaches within 1 kilometer of a project area, we want 75% of those fish to pass. In addition to that, we're concerned about delays, timing to pass. So once the fish arrives, we want them to pass within 48 hours or less. So there's 2 criteria. Another criteria is survival. Of course, when we're talking about hydroelectric projects, there's turbines, there's different operations. Fish can spill over the dam, they can go through the turbines. There's lots of places where they could be injured or killed. And so we specified 95% survival rate And there's a time component as well for downstream passage. That's for adults and juveniles, because the adults are going to go back out to the ocean after they spawn, and the juveniles will go back out in the fall as 3 to 4 inch juvenile fish. Some data from the Connecticut River that I can share with you here. Fishway monitoring counts. You can see the top panel is American shad, and it's not just about numbers. You can see at Holyoke, the first barrier on the Connecticut River, we average about 320,000 shad passed a year. Last year was about average, about 320,000. You can see quite a bit of variability. The blueback herring, you'll notice a terrible crash occurring in the 1990s. That's where I do a lot of work in the river, doing assessment work. We're trying and research with many other people and trying to develop more active restoration strategies. It's not just about numbers, as that slide shows. It's also about stock structure. When we say stock structure, it's the age structure. If these fish can live to 10 years old, when we're doing our assessment work and we're determining the age structure, we don't want the fish that we're sampling to just peter out at age 5 if they're supposed to be 7, 8, 9, 10-year-old fish. That's an important thing. And that also contributes to repeat spawners, right? If we have older fish, that means they're surviving to come back to spawn again. And that's very important from a management standpoint. At the very bottom, there's an interesting figure with the short-nosed sturgeon. Jose's going to talk about that. Lots of good developments in fish passage technologies in recent years. And I'll end there on that slide. And I've got a website for my office where I produce annual reports. There's other information, migratory fish counts. I give updates on that throughout the spring at the Connecticut River Basin Fishways. Again, working with many other partners. And I believe Amanda will be sharing the links for ASMFC, my office, and I'd be happy to, at the conclusion of this, answer some questions. I do have a couple more slides after Jose speaks about the relicensing process, because I think people are interested in that. So I'm going to go into a little more detail and talk for about 5 minutes on that regulatory work that I'm involved with other people. So thank you.
All right, let's send it over to Jesus. You are still muted.
Now I am. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Thank you, Amanda, for the introduction. As you mentioned, I'm a fish passenger engineer with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the last 15 years. I do a lot of work in the FERC regulatory work, but also outside of that, and everything that having to do with aquatic connectivity efforts. My favorite species in this river, in any other river, is the American eel, which unfortunately I didn't see anyone saying that in the chat, but by far my favorite. So a little bit of the agenda today. I had to think about how to best use my time during this presentation. I decided to, instead of giving you a broad view of all fish passage related things in the Connecticut River, which would have taken us a week of conversation, I decided to narrow focus on one particular species, the American shad, and on 2 particular projects, Holyoke project and the Capitol Station and the Turners Falls Dam, and explain and give you a flavor of some of the challenges that we have when it comes to passing fish, providing fish passage, and so on. We're going to start with the definition of fishway. What is a fishway? As we understand it, and as the legal the law says it defines it, a little bit of the hydraulic design methodology, which is how most fishways, technical fishways are designed with, a little bit of a history of American shad in the Holyoke Dam, history of American shad at the Capitol Station, a little bit of the downstream passage, and some of the improvement that have been done on the Holyoke Dam, and then finish with some of the little bit of a plug-in for our upcoming fish passage design manual. So a little bit of a history of fish passage. This is not new. This is not a new problem. This is not a new effort. Fish passage has been going on for centuries. all the way back to British common law. They require fish passage for any mill operator. In this side of the pond, we saw the first law go into place in 1709 on the Plymouth colony, where it's now present day New England, where the law prohibited any construction of weirs that would impact fish passing during their migration. A little bit more to present time. A lot of the work that drives our work and our effort and our interaction with fish passage is driven by Section 18 of the Federal Power Act of 1920. It requires any dam operator, any dam owners to provide fish passage for migratory species. And in this law, it defines a fishway as all physical structures, facilities, or devices necessary to maintain all life stages of such fish, and project operations and measures related to such structures, which means fishway is now not a ladder. Fishway is not a lift. Fishway is a lot more than just those. Those are components, and often, and I myself have the same problem, sometimes call it something a fishway when it's just a component of a larger fish. And I will show a little bit more on that, what I mean. Before that, it's in our opinion that most restoration activities for aquatic connectivity and fish passage fall into two big buckets. And the reason why I put them in two big buckets is because the steps that you take to implement each one are very unique and different and distinct from each other. The first one is stream simulation. A lot of people might hear about this. What is stream simulation? Well, stream simulation is often referred to any time that you are trying to mimic natural geomorphic attributes of a site and replacing a anthropologic barrier or any type of impact on that stream with what you understand to be natural conditions before that impact was presented or introduced. Or the other door is a hydraulic design methodology, which really is a design or an approach to provide passage for a selected number of fish species. When you talk about stream simulation, we're not going to talk too much about it, but this is what it means. You know, there's a spectrum within stream simulation in terms of levels of restoration that you can accomplish. And again, it's a different conversation. In the main stem of the Connecticut River, we don't see a lot of this going on. Those dams are not going anywhere. Anytime that you cannot remove the dam, you cannot remove the barrier and replace it with natural condition, then you are stuck or forced to go into the second door and really focus on a target species. So why is the hydraulic design methodology? The hydraulic design methodology is a design strategy that targets distinct species of fish without necessarily accounting or designing for the natural requirements of the non-target species. So as you can think, what it means is fish species selectivity is unavoidable. As you can see, when you start talking about, okay, I got my list of species that I want to provide passage for. What am I looking for? I'm looking for both swimming capabilities and biological behaviors, meaning I want to know how fast my target species can move, and I want to know what size it is so that I can provide the appropriate space, hydraulic space for it to move, and whether it's a schooling or non-schooling that will impact or affect my decision on how to provide that passage. As you can see, this is the 5 or 6 species that we always talk about. Obviously, there are a lot more fish species in the river than those 6. Therefore, fish selectivity is inevitable, and you should be aware of that. So, how do we provide, or at least how we define? This is a way that I define the impact or the zone of passage that is responsibility of the owner, of the dam owner, to provide passage for. Can you see my cursor? Perfect. So from our standpoint, the owner of this dam is responsible for movement from this white line to this white line. And everything in between is the responsibility of the dam owner or dam owners. Maybe there's more than one owner in this project that is benefiting from the pool that was artificially created. And so what we as fish passage practitioners focus on is providing a zone of passage throughout that entire affected area. Um, and what is a zone of passage? Well, a zone of passage is a contiguous area of sufficient lateral, longitudinal, and vertical extent in which adequate hydraulic and environmental conditions. So first, the size and the opening, the space. Is there a space for the species to move through? And then hydraulic environmental conditions. Is there the velocity is adequate for them to be able to navigate those waters without exerting themselves too much? Is there the temperature adequate? Is the DO level adequate? And so on and so on. So making sure that not only the space is there, but also the environmental conditions are maintained to provide a route of passage through a stream reach influenced by human-made barrier. That influence goes from white line to white line. What often happens is that people don't see what is happening on the water. And you can see that, you have a zone of passes that are clear here. And going back to my previous definition of what a fishway is, once you turn on those turbine units and you start discharging water, that might be affecting your zone of passes, and you need to understand that, right? So in this particular case, which is not a real case, it's made up case, but in this particular case, the operation of the powerhouse and the discharge of those units are part of the fishway, even though, people don't think about them as a fishway, and once you say fishway, you think about the ladder, and that's it. So keeping that in mind, that is fishway is a lot more than. Now, I know it says fishways here because that's how people refer to them. This is a good list of most available conventional, traditional fish passage structures. I prefer that terminology. There's a few new ones that we are updating it for the upcoming guidelines, but for now, this is pretty good, especially for the two projects that we're going to be focusing on the rest of the conversation. Holyoke Dam is a lift or fish elevator. Looks like this. And Cabot Station, right next on the downstream side of the power canal for the Tornos Falls Dam, is Ice Harbor Pool and Weir Fishway. And so we're going to be talking about those two and how what we know about American shad using those two. So one thing that is important to understand is that a lot of these fishways were designed a long time ago by scientists and practitioners in Europe and in the west coast of the United States. Most, if not all, initially were focused on salmons and passing Atlantic salmons in Europe, all the types of salmons in the Pacific, salmons like Chinook and cohorts. And so it's important to understand that some of the challenges that we're seeing today might be a consequence of applying those technologies to species that were never really proven to be able to use those fishways appropriately. So even though it might be really good for salmons, not necessarily for all the species, and we're going to touch on that later on. Explain a little bit more on that, but just know that historically that's what happened, and that's where those technologies come from. So a little bit on the history in the Holyoke Dam, and hopefully a lot of you have visited the dam already. If not, you should. There's a visitor center there that you can see the migration happening in May. Go late April, early May to see the most amount of fish that you can. It's a really cool site. Over there, they have a fish lift, as I mentioned. But a little bit of history. In the first fishway was actually built in 1873. It was a timber fish ladder. It did not work. Actually, while looking to the history, the first dam that they built here can't remember right now, it was 1850 or 60 or something like that. The first dam they built, it was timber made, and it flushed down 5 days after. So, and they had to rebuild another one. The second one stand and actually is still buried behind the existing dam. So it's interesting. In 1940, a new fish ladder made out of concrete was built. You can still see it on River Left. And so it's still there. It was basically a slide. Did not work well either. So that didn't work well. Finally, in 1955, it was until 1955 that you started to actually reconnect or reintroduce fish upstream of this dam when they installed a fish elevator. So that was when the fish lift or fish elevator came into place. It was the first fish lift in the United States. Say East Coast, but I can't imagine that there was another one on the West Coast. So I don't know, but at least in the East Coast, it was the first one. And yeah, the first year it passed 5,000, almost 5,000 American shad. So to today's standard, a great success, but it's still pretty good success. So it was improved over time. Kept working on it over the decades, and eventually peaked in 1992 at 720,000 American shad. It moved a lot of fish, a lot of biomass. And last year it was a pretty average year in terms of the last, like Ken mentioned, 324,000. It's a pretty good number, especially compared to other rivers in the East Coast. I work in the Susquehanna. They are passing 6,000, 7,000 a year. So this is pretty good success for American shad restoration. So a little bit of history of American shad passage at the Cabo Station. So here's the Cabo Station. This is the power canal, the Terrence Falls Dam. This fishway was built after the fish lift, and it was actually driven by some assumptions made that came from information or experience in the West Coast on the Columbia River. On the Columbia River, they had installed on the Bonneville Dam, they had installed a ice harbor fishway in 1937. And it was, again, focused on salmons. It was doing great for salmons, but they also saw, even though American shad is not a target species over there, they saw a lot of American shad using it. And so someone made the assumption, hey, that is working there, moving a lot of shad too. We don't know why, but it's working there. Let's bring it over here. Well, before that, the Anadromous Fish Conservation Act in 1965 was renewed. It really activated a lot of effort and in organization coordination between the federal and states agencies to restore American shad. So, even though before probably the attention was on the salmons and other commercially profitable species, this Anadromous Fish Conservation Act in 1965 really helped put more attention on other anadromous species like American shad and river herring and so on. And so it gave a lot more power for the agencies to be able to require and ask for passage. At the time of design, as I mentioned, there was no real studies or understanding of how well the fish was working for American shad over there. Even though they were passing a lot of numbers, they didn't know the efficiency, meaning they had no idea out of 100 American shad that showed up to that fishway, how many of them moved up. It might be high, might be low, it just didn't know. And so when they came to this dam here in this project, was a 70 feet tall ladder that they had to build in the early 70s. And it was intended to accommodate both salmon. They had really high confidence that they would work, but also shad without really knowing exactly whether it would work or not. One important aspect of this new fishway in Cabo Station, it was a scaled down version of the one over there on the Columbia River. So the Columbia River was a lot wider. The pools were a lot bigger, a lot more volume, a lot more attraction flow, a lot more. And so I'll explain later a little bit of why that might have been a big problem to scale down and still assume that American shad would be able to use it correctly or appropriately. So let's talk a little bit about performance at this cable station. The numbers, once they installed this, initially in the first few years, they were dramatically low. It was not doing what they were hoping for it to be doing. Again, back then there was not a lot of technology to be able to tag fish and put array antennas and tools that we have today that we didn't have back then. In the 1980s, there was some modifications, understanding that there was a passage problem at this fishway. They make some modifications hydraulically to make it more streamlining and streaming flow instead of plunging flow, deepening the openings and see if it worked. It increased the numbers from hundreds to 1,000 to thousands of fish, but we still didn't know whether it was working correctly. It wasn't until early 2005, and I saw Alex Harrow over there in the audience. He with Ted Carlos Santos in the Conti Lab, the USGS Conti Lab, which sits right next to the power canal, and right next to this project, obviously. Basically evaluated the fishway and concluded that it was a very low, poorly performing fishway for American shad, and that the percentage of fish that entered the fishway and made it all the way upstream was really low. So it was rounded up about 5% at some point. So, and what I wanted to say here is for you to understand the community effect, right? So every time that you encounter one of these projects and you lose a large percentage of your population, you keep, it accumulates. And so it becomes a bottleneck. And this is what I'm trying to show here. And, this is in the numbers, you're seeing 5% of the fish that passed at Holyoke, only 5% would pass Turner's Falls. And so you can see that all of a sudden you have a big bottleneck problem at Cabo Station that needs to be resolved. Going back to my previous point, hey, what happened? Why did it not work? Well, again, we made some assumptions, incorrect ones probably, that whatever worked for West Coast salmons would work for American shad in the East Coast. First of all, salmons are not schooling fish. They are solitary migrants, so they don't need to hang out with other fish to be motivated to move upstream. American shad have demonstrated that that's a big push for them to move when they are accompanied by other species of other individuals of the species. They don't jump. They are strong swimmers and they can move through very high velocity, but they don't jump, so they don't leap. Meaning that anytime that you are putting plunging flow, they're gonna have trouble kind of plunging flow, meaning you can see over here is an example of a plunging flow versus streaming flow. So plunging flow has this roller and salmon love that. Salmon love the roller, and because they can basically position themselves in a way that they can do to leap, and they don't mind it. American shad and river herring, for that matter, it's they don't like doing that. They don't like having to search the right location and diagonally move upstream and jump or leap, and so that's a big problem. And I think that the last one, and I just based on the result of the study, we noticed that there was a big drop in turning pools. So every turning pool of the ladder, which is needed to be able to kind of snake around until getting all the way up to the head pond, you had a big loss of percentage of fish. And so the question is, is it hydraulics? Is it not big enough space for them to kind of hang out together and stage and keep going? We don't know. I think there's a combination of things. I think there's hydraulics. The pools, as I mentioned, in the Bonneville Dam and the Ice Harbor and Bonneville Dam, huge pools. 3-4 times the size of these pools here as a scaled down version ended up with. And so understanding this issue is important for American shad. I think we have seen the same problem in other types of fishways, like the Neo fishways and other stuff, pulling weirs where once you start doing a turning pool and you don't deal with the hydraulics adequately, then you lose a lot of them. And whether it's for space or it's for hydraulics and confusion and turbulence, regardless, the turning pools are becoming more and more evident that they are not working well for American shad. Let's not forget downstream. It's important to never forget downstream, especially for American shad. It's often overlooked. People think that as long as I put them upstream, they'll be fine. And for salmon, for example, obviously there are one-time spawners. They spawn and they die, and their smolt come down river. It's easier to protect those smaller fish. For American shad, it's actually very important to protect the adults as they come back, because we want repeat spawners. Repeat spawners are really efficient at spawning. And so we want those repeat spawners to come back. So for them to be able to come back again into the river and do it again for second or even third time, it's important to protect them as they move out and not stress them out, not kill them, obviously, not strike them. And so the it's just it's an imperative that I think people often overlooked, and think that spillway and gravity will fix it and get them out of the river. But there's a lot of injury and threats as they move down, from getting entrained through the units and getting struck by the blades, going and getting so oversaturation over here, and getting their eyes blown up. Injury, predation is another big issue, because once they go down, they're stunned, they're confused, they're stressed, maybe they're not swimming well, and predators take advantage of those things. So it's important to understand that there's a lot of threat as they move downstream, and that we need to protect them. And so one conclusion that I think is important to is actually it was surprise to me when I read this paper a couple of 10 years ago already, that sometimes it's actually, gotta be careful. If you don't have a good system to protect them going downstream, and your downstream habitat is not saturated, it might be better to not move in upstream. I know it's counterintuitive, and it took me a while for me to understand that, but it's almost as important, if you want to move downstream, to have good solutions or good protection and good routing passage as they move downstream, especially for shad and other adults. So to that point, there was a lot of work that was done in 2015 at the Holyoke Dam that I think is important to recognize. Started with a big new intake rack in the units, with large rack with small openings to exclude all fish and guide them into a uniform acceleration weir, and a new type of weir for the bypass, for the fish bypass, that basically reduce the rate of avoidance. And so what it does, instead of having a sharp change in velocity that the fish then feel it and move out, they get a gradual increase in velocity until a point of no return, and then they get sucked in and hopefully safely move, bypassing the intakes. And so what we don't want them is to go into the intakes and get obviously struck by the units and blades, but we want to make sure that we catch them. And so this uniform acceleration is a good way of doing it. A low level fish bypass entrance for benthic species like adult eels and sturgeon, we're also putting there. And downstream, they built a ski jump. And a ski jump was not necessarily, it was actually a two-way, obviously for downstream migrants, but what they had before was that fish bypass sloughs, all the water going into the same entrance. So behind this, there's an entrance to the left. And so what was happening is that attraction water coming out of the entrance, so for upstream migrants, was being completely flushed and overwhelmed by the downstream sluice. And so the solution was, well, let's create a bridge or ski jump so that we can have both, right? So what you can imagine is this water go up, and this is downstream migrants. And for upstream migrants, there's a nice attraction flow coming out of this way, moving up, down, and any upstream migrants that are in this area should feel it and go underneath the ski jump. A little bit touching back, this is exactly the same information that Ken gave you earlier, but so you see all the problems that we have for fish passage. We understand that there is really low passage efficiency on some projects, and we look at this high standard, which comes not only from, it's not arbitrary. A lot of it come from biological modeling to understand what is needed for the population to grow in the watershed, to eventually get to some natural or sustainable population levels. Once you get this, then what do? You are really far away. Seems like we are really far away from these standards and these performance standards and levels. And so what you do is not quit. You never quit. It's like I tell my son, don't quit. You keep going. This is not a static field. This is not a you finish the work and we have a solution forever. Even if you find a solution on one side, it's not the same solution on the other side, as you already know from Bonnie with them. And so what you do is identify the problems that we already talked about. You look at literature review, you look at what other people are doing in other places in the world, you make sure that you understand what is available there. Are we doing the best available science? Are we applying the best available science or not? If there is no answer to your question, you identify the information gap, you call the folks at Conti Lab, and you say, hey, I have this problem, I have this question, I want to be answered. And then you do research either in the lab or you're outside of the lab, you work on it and you bring it into guidelines so that other people can find that information again and keep going and going and going. And that's what we have been doing for the last probably at least the guidelines part in 2016 was our first version of the guidelines. We have a 2019 is the last version, but we have been working for 3 years to update the new version, and this is the team of authors that you are hopefully going to see the publication of the 2026 fish passage guidelines. It is right now during internal review, so a little bit of a plug for us and our work, and we're hoping that it's going to continue to push the field forward and keep answering questions and getting better fish passage solutions in place. And with that, that's it. Thank you so much for your time. I think, I'm sorry, I can't remember.
We're going to head to
Go ahead,
Ken, and he'll give a few more points, and then we'll slide over to Kate. It looks like we might be a little bit over, so if folks can stay for Q&A beyond 1 p.m., that'd be great. If you can't, please throw some questions in the chat so that we can answer them, and we'll send the recording.
Okay, I'm going to just show one slide in the interest of time here. It was really good to have Jesus present that share. I mean, it is a fish passage webinar, and so that was a lot of really good detail. I'm just going to share this one slide that deals with the FERC relicensing process. Is that showing?
Can you put it in presenter view?
There we go. Okay. So again, I've spent, in some years, 30% of my time working with other biologists, fish passage engineers, I'll move up into Vermont and New Hampshire. Great River Hydro, 3 main stem dams. We've got 5 hydroelectric projects spanning from Turner's Falls to Wilder Dam and their impoundments. It's 135 miles of river that are affected by operations. And so this relicensing process is a very big deal. Just in short, there are 30 to 50-year licenses. The reality is they're going to be 50-year licenses. So we refer to this as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get new conditions in place. It's taken a lot of time. Started working on this in 2012. We don't have the licenses yet. We had meetings to develop study plans, have the studies conducted, review the work, come up with different ideas internally, and still not finalized. I mean, hopefully they will be finalized soon. So in the case of Turner's Falls and Northfield Mount, the pump storage facility, we have a signed settlement agreement. With the Great River Hydro, we did all the process of a settlement agreement without signing. We just agreed upon things dealing with fish passage, both up and downstream, fish passage protections that Jesus was talking about, operational flows that could be also tied into fish passage. Again, as Jesus talked about, operational flows that just benefit habitat and species in a more general approach. So that can even be parsed out. There's a lot of fine details. Jesus says, and other folks that are involved, I mean, we could spend days talking about this. So we really, just trying to give a quick overview. I will lastly say that the agencies have always taken the approach and the strategy, downstream passage protections come first. We are not putting fish upstream until all the downstream passage protections and measures are in place and they're operating to our satisfaction with our performance metrics. So that's why when people look at how things have been laid out in the agreements, upstream passage is coming at the end. And I will tell you, that's the proper way to do it. And the reason why we do it is we don't want to put fish up just to have them killed. It's counterproductive. It would just make no sense. So that's the basis for that. So I'll end there, and maybe we can, Amanda, you can manage questions.
We're going to head over to Kate for a little bit of a CRC connection. All right, Kate, you are on mute. I still can't hear you.
Yep, got you. Apologies, my Zoom was announcing things to me and I couldn't click the right button. But thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Ken and Jesus, for giving us some context about why fish passage matters to our river and how to implement it correctly at our different areas. And so we at CRC do interact closely with both the state and federal agencies on a lot of these issues. Our programs and advocacy staff together work on both migratory fish and fish passage needs in a variety of capacities. As Ken noted, and as many of you are aware, the river stewards in our states are deeply involved in hydro relicensing efforts, not just on the main stem, but also at tributary hydroelectric facilities. And part of this involves working to ensure the installation of new passage facilities or improvements to existing passage facilities where they are needed as part of that relicensing process. We also support policies that will improve fish population numbers in general, such as working to reduce bycatch of river herring in offshore fisheries. It's pretty hard to tell if we're reaching our safe, timely, and efficient passage goals if there are no fish using the facilities to pass. And we also work with agency and hydro company staff to make small incremental changes that Jesus alluded to, and continuing improving passage metrics at existing facilities that are not due for major upgrades as part of a relicensing process. And as noted by Ken and Jesus, the work designing, building, and improving passageways is all supported by science. And so CRC, our aquatic ecology program, that's me, works closely with the Connecticut River Migratory Fish Restoration Cooperative on a number of migratory fish and fish passage adjacent data gathering efforts to understand the status of fish populations and where passage improvements may be needed. These include actually counting the fish at passage facilities at the dams, as well as monitoring fish use of tributaries and documenting where fish are now and where they may have been historically to better understand current passage needs, such as our community science sea lamprey nest surveys or our ongoing eDNA work in both the mean stem and tributaries. And lastly, this is not hydraulic passage, but the other one, right? CRC's restoration team removes barriers to fish passage, such as dams or non-functioning culverts when they're no longer serving their intended purpose. The restoration team also works to improve both riparian and in-stream habitat. So when our migratory fish are returning for spawning, they have suitable habitat in which to spawn and feed. Next slide, please. So those are some ways that CRC is involved in fish passage and fish monitoring and migratory fish monitoring. And I'm always asked the question of how can you, as members of the public, help understand passage needs and works towards improvements? Is there a way that you can help with this? And the answer is always absolutely. I would encourage you to volunteer for things like the sea lamprey nest surveys, other community science efforts that are offered by us and other river organizations in terms of counting and monitoring fish. I encourage you particularly to do things like what you're doing today and come learn more about stuff. Be curious, ask questions, keep on learning about what fish are in our river and what those fish need and how the existence of those fish are benefiting us as humans as well. That can be a big have a big impact, is drawing those connections between how we can have a mutually beneficial relationship with both of us existing here. Jesus said this, but visit a passage facility. It's one of the easiest ways to see our migratory fish, and they have very interesting history and future within our river system as well. Support research funding. This is a big one. We have learned a lot about how to make fish passage more effective, and that has all been done through research at places like the Conti Laboratory or academic institutions or for-profit companies that are doing research in terms of how to improve and build different types of passageways as well. This may seem counterintuitive a little bit, but be a conscious consumer as well. I alluded to the river herring bycatch issues, right? Those are surrounded by particular fisheries in the ocean. And one of those types of fish that has a lot of river herring bycatch is a fish that gets used for a lot of cat food. And so I personally have stopped buying that type of fish cat food for my cats, despite their deep love of it, because I want to see some river herring returning to other parts of the Connecticut River. And maybe that'll be a little tiny bit of help towards that. And with all of the learning that you're doing about migratory fish and their passage needs and how we can do to make improvements for them and get more fish in our river, keep speaking up and demanding more for our migratory fish populations. Everyone here at this webinar wants to see more fish in the river. So keep talking about why that's important to us and spread the love of migratory fish. Whether your favorite fish is an eel or a lamprey or a shad, tell somebody else why they're so cool and you should care about them. And thank you all for coming today. I really appreciate your participation. And Ken and Jesus, thank you so much for the interesting information you shared. I'm going to pass it back to Amanda, who's going to moderate questions, and I will stick around until we've run out of questions.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. Now we have our Brady Bunch screen. So let's look at our questions here. Someone asked, why is it called Ice Harbor? And we had Ken say that's the name of the dam it was developed for in the Columbia River. And we also put a link in here. Stacy asked, why didn't the Turner's Falls Dam utilize the same fishway design as Holyoke, since that's been more successful? Great question, Stacy. And Ken, you mentioned that the Turner's Falls ladders were developed by US Fish and Wildlife engineers, and they do not require operators working only during daytime. less upkeep, and there are trade-offs to consider, and it was viewed as a good option that the company also supported. Ken or Jesus, do you have anything to add to that answer before we shuffle forward?
Yeah, that's, there's pros and cons, right? And I think volitional passage is usually preferable, especially from our standpoint. By volitional, it means, open the thing, let it run. There are some fish that do move at night and does not stay with the 8 to 5 hours where people come and work. So I think there is some limitations to what, especially lamprey, for example. Lamprey actually move out at night pretty often. And so, yeah, in general, we want to see volitional passage happen the most that we can. Now, the risk was, as I mentioned, downscaling a fish way that kind of worked for American shad, or at least they thought it would work for American shad, and the downscaling did not work for them here. It was a big risk. Someone took it, and we're now here. Just so you know, there is a active plan to install a fish lift to replace that fish way. So, to your question, yes, and yeah, we're going to end up with a fish lift there.
Good news. All
Yeah.
right.
I just want to add quickly one thing, because we talked about the problems that everyone's well aware of. The next dam upstream, Vernon Dam, is an ice harbor and then a vertical slot. It's a kind of a hybrid. And I will say we are very close to achieving in most years what our targeted passage goals are. So there are examples where these fishway designs do work. It does work at Vernon. We want to make it better, but it's actually coming quite close to our performance goals, as is the Holyoke fish lift for American shad. As Jesus talked about, there's a lot of other species to be concerned about, but for American shad, with the studies and research we've done, I can share that. So thanks.
All right. The next question is from Jill. How are the approaching shad or any other fish counted before they enter the fishway to know the success rate? Who wants to take that one? Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I did answer that in the chat. Because, as Jesus really did a good job explaining, fish passage is a process. As the fish approach the dam, when they're within 1 kilometer, we feel they're interacting with that project. So you need to have a technology that can detect when those fish arrive within 1 kilometer. So that's a radio tag or an acoustic tag, something that is sending out a signal that can be detected. There are other tags like with driving, pit tags we call them, where they have to go through an actual antenna. So that works within a fishway. But at distance, we need to use those pinging or radio tags to know how many fish are approaching, how they behave relative to operational conditions. Once they enter, if they have the pit tag, we can get more detailed within fishway passage information. They may enter, but they may fall back out, etc. And then as they leave, we also like to document progress upstream rather than them falling back. And again, that's where these radio tags and technology and Alex Harrow and the Conti Lab really developed great specialties with those technologies.
Yeah, I would add, you basically have to choose a sample size. You have to say, okay, I'm going to tag 200, 500 fish, and then that's not your denominator. That's still not your denominator. You release them, tag fish, and then you let them move up or downstream of the project. Once they cross a line, and think about that white line that I'm showing you, or whatever arbitrary line you have on your particular site, then they become the denominator, meaning those fish that cross the line have demonstrated the interest and the drive to move upstream. And then from that number of the total fish that cross the line, how many made it to the entrance? Out of those numbers that made it to the entrance, how many made it to the upstream part of the fishway, and the ladder or the lift or so on. And so you can start distinguishing the efficacy and the performance of the fish passage project to attract fish to the right location, to maintain them in the zone of passage, and to pass them successfully upstream, and then extrapolate those conclusions based on the sample size. So you're not looking at the full population of fish as they move up, Now, something very exciting that I'm trying to get my head around and see if how can we implement and talking to different technologies is the AI, and there are some interest on creating tagless monitoring systems using AI and using different type of technologies to get some quantitative data on fish passage without having to grab the fish, tag them, and release them. And so there's a lot of stress involved, and there's a lot of, and we think there's some idea that there is some influence on the behavior of the fish. And if you catch him and you catch him inside the fish way, you tag him and put him back down, then that's not a naive fish, and so on, so on, so on. So hopefully, eventually, we can start doing some tagless monitoring. But for now, yes, the technology that we use is the tagging radio telemetry or acoustic telemetry studies. We tag fish. Yes.
Great. So we have a few more questions, but they were also answered in the chat while we were wrapping up. So I just want to shout them out so that they're kind of encapsulated in our recording. And a shout out to the Chicopee Comp AP Environmental Science class. That's my alma mater. It's great to see you all here, and thanks for your questions. I appreciate it. You are the future. So why do fish spawn in freshwater and adults migrate to the ocean? And then are some conditions more favorable? And Ken said, where are we? Some fish species have evolved to take advantage of more productive marine environments, anadromy, and the survival risks must be outweighed by fitness, ability to pass their genes on by spawning to work. Kate, do you have anything to add to that?
Evolution really is the answer, right? So that this is the cycle that they are actually required to do these two different areas in order to complete their life cycle, and they cannot complete their life cycle if they're either stuck specifically in freshwater or stuck specifically in saltwater, with the exception of the short-nosed sturgeon, who can be in freshwater for their full life cycle. But so they have evolved to use these different environments for different parts of their life cycle, and they take advantage of those different environments for different needs in parts of their life cycle as well, too. So like Ken said, the marine environment can often provide better feeding for a lot of these large fish, right? There's more primary productivity down there. There's lots more snacks for them. But it's also possible that in the freshwater environment, there's less predation on the very small areas. And so over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, this has been the evolutionary process to get to these anadromous and catadromous fish, and doing this back and forth between salt and freshwater to complete their life cycle. And if you think about it, there are similar sorts of migrations in a lot of other animals too. We think about even monarch butterflies, right? Or a lot of birds that are moving back and forth through two different habitats in order to complete different stages of their life cycle. And whether that's laying eggs and making babies, or whether that's feeding, they are not necessarily doing all these things in different areas. And so they have evolved over time to take advantage of habitats that give them the best fitness to complete that aspect of their life cycle. And it's really quite remarkable when you think about it.
I would also add, I've been learning about amphidermy, which is a type of anadromous species, anatomy. Amphidermy, instead of them going down and as juveniles and living their whole lives, or becoming adults in the ocean, they spawn in fresh water. The eggs and the larvae drift down with the current, ends up in the estuary, where they have a lot more food to grow a little bit. But as soon as they grow enough, as juveniles, they move upstream and they live their lives in the fresh water. So most of their lives, both the spawning and most of their life, is spent on the fresh water, but they spend just a little amount of time in the estuary eating enough to get. So as you say, there is some benefits, and apparently, yeah, evolution says that this is the most successful way of this is the species that survived over time.
Awesome. All right, thanks for those answers. One more question from the AP Environmental Science class. Since the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service partners with non-governmental organizations, do they also get funding from those organizations or just from the government? Talking about flow and streams. Who wants to talk about funding? Ken.
Sure. My office is funded primarily by money from the federal government. I do have agreements with the states. They also help to support my office. It's relatively a small dollar amount, but it's greatly appreciated. So I do get state funds contributed. Many of these organizations, and Kate can speak to it, the CRC, they can ask Congress to get more money to help with conservation activities. We're forbidden from doing that. So CRC, I want to just recognize them. They've contacted the congressionals and said, hey, there's a lot of good work that can go on in the Connecticut River that needs to occur. And the money comes to Fish and Wildlife Service, to my office, and then we're able to put it out for research activities, monitoring activities, outreach, et cetera. So CRC is effectively been getting federal dollars. They can then go out to NGOs as well as state and federal partners.
Especially in the regulatory realm, where we are dealing with companies that are making money off of energy and the resource. We don't get any money from them, but we don't give them money. So most, if not all, of that work that happens in those type of projects is funded by them, by the company themselves, and we help FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to decide what kind of mitigation efforts and laws get applied to each project as they move forward. But the money comes from them on that. So technically, the work that we think is important is also sometimes funded. So it's not that they give us the money, but we coordinate so that then the funds get invested in the solutions that we think is important. So it's great. So
Great. Two more questions I'm seeing. Three more questions. One is, what opportunities are there for students to get involved? And a few are listed here. So writing comment letters anytime to state or Federal Energy Regulatory Commission opens for public comment on fish-related issues. There's none open right now, but definitely check back on our website. And then anyone can look at our volunteer page. We've got listings throughout the field season, which generally hits between June and August. So it's less student-oriented, just people come join us and volunteer out in the watershed. And if you're looking for more info, feel free to email me back. I will send out this recording of this presentation so you can share it out with folks, and I'm happy to be in touch. The last two questions, one is about AI. Ooh, big question. What are some of the challenges of implementing AI tools? Is it a cost consideration? Are the tools not well developed enough? And is it working with the different partners or something else? And that's by Annie.
All
good
of
question. A little bit, yeah. New technology, not well developed yet. There's a lot of promise and there's a lot of hope, at least from my standpoint. There's a lot of hope. The hope is actually that it becomes more accessible, more affordable to do some type of these large scale evaluations. So large scale evaluation with tagging fish are very expensive. So we're hoping that eventually we can get to a point where, and then hiring people to count fish is very expensive, and then having all these things. So we're hoping that eventually AI help us lower the costs of operating and doing monitoring in these projects. For now, but the good thing is that there's actually a good number of companies that are really taking this on head on and giving a really good effort at finding solutions. And so I've been in communication with a lot of them. There are places that we already are seeing some success at counting fish. There's a camera box that was installed in Plymouth, actually, at one of the fishways, where they would used to count fish manually, meaning they had a camera and they had volunteers like you, students, counting fish and stuff. That now is just put a camera, and then at the end of the season, they run it to the AI, and then you get the fish counted by the AI. And that's already happening in multiple places, counting eels. Bye, students. Thank you for coming. And so, yeah, there is a lot of promise. There's a lot of hope, and we are in the beginning of it. So it's exciting time for that type of introduction of new technology into the field, to the oil field like this. So.
Great. And our last question to wrap it up, who pays for the ladders, et cetera, at an individual dam?
I think I
Jesus.
covered a little bit on at least on the FERC side of things, that is completely on the company's coming out of the company's pocket. A lot of times there's no company, and then but there's still a need for fish passage, and there's grant funding and partnering and matching, fund matching. At that point, I don't understand how those things happen and work, but there's a lot of collaboration. So it depends on whether it's a FERC regulated jurisdiction or not. And so those two things are very different. But as I said, when it's FERC regulated, it's completely in the company, and it's up to them. But go ahead, Ken, if you have another.
No, you covered it. I would just say that, the non-FERC jurisdiction dams, which if there's 3,000 dams in the Connecticut River, there's somewhere in the order of like 116 FERC regulated dams. So that's a lot of other dams. Preferably, we like to remove them, and CRC works on that. But in instances where you can't do that, that's where the technical fishways that Jesus works on, and you have to come up with the money to install and operate and tend them. There's a cost associated with that.
Great. Well, I think that's all of our questions for today. And thanks for sticking with us if you've stayed this long. Thanks for joining us to learn more about efforts to bolster our watershed's resilience. And we hope to see you next month on Wednesday, April 15th at noon, same time, same place, for a live stream on aquatic invasive species. For more information and the registration link, check out our website at ctriver.org/events. Thanks again, and have a lovely day.